Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this seventh session of the summarized version of Quran uh, that we are doing during the holy month of Ramadan, year 2024. In our yesterday's session, we had done Surah An-Nisa. Today we are inshallah going to do Surah Al-Maaida, the fifth surah of the Quran, and it's a surah that partners with Surah An-Nisa to form a pair. While Surah An-Nisa, as we saw, is talking about the outlines of Muslim society, which the Almighty has presented before the believers. In Surah Al-Maaida, the same ideal Islamic society is taken to its climax with all the significant Sharia expectations mentioned, clarified in details. Having done that, the Almighty has then gone on to declare that now the religion that I was to give to you through my last messenger in the last book has been completed. And having completed the presentation of his religion, he has also taken a covenant and undertaking from believers that they will be loyal to the message that they have received from their creator. And if that's what they're going to do, they will receive the Almighty's blessings. In other words, success in this world and success in the next world. So let's begin with Surah Al-Maaida. The very first verse is talking about what this surah is all about. It says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. Believers, fulfill your contracts. Fulfilling promises, contracts is at the very heart of a true religious behavior. It is clarified in a hadith that the one who is not trustworthy in contracts, doesn't abide by his contracts, has no religion. Religion is a commitment to the Almighty, to his message. And this commitment, it manifests itself in various different ways when we go about believing in and practicing God's message. So that's the first thing that the Almighty mentions in this surah, not surprisingly. We move on to verse 3, and what we find is that the mention of the Sharia regarding those edibles, food that is to be stayed away from, that has been prohibited. The same list has been mentioned. That is, if the animal is dead, the flesh of it cannot be consumed. The blood of an animal, even if the animal is lawful, the blood cannot be consumed. Then the flesh of meat of swine, pork, cannot be consumed. And animals slaughtered, even if it's lawful, slaughtered in the name of anyone other than the Creator, God, that animal is also not going to be consumed. This expectation of the Almighty has been mentioned in other passages of the Quran as well, in Surah Al-Baqarah, in Surah Al-Nahl, in Surah Al-An'am. But in this surah of completion, what we find is that the mention has gone on into details and described What exactly is it that is required when it's said that an animal that's dead, its flesh cannot be consumed? So people had questions, they had confusions in their mind, and those questions were addressed. Uh, the question arose that, okay, if you cannot consume the meat of an animal that has been slaughtered in the name of anyone other than Allah, then what about the animal that is slaughtered in the name of Allah, but is slaughtered at a place where ordinarily there are animals slaughtered in the name of someone other than God? So the Quran mentioned in this surah that animal, the meat of it cannot be consumed. Likewise, the question arose that if an animal is slaughtered in the name of God and is slaughtered at a place where there's no problem, there aren't any practices where you find that the name of the animals are also slaughtered in the name of uh, deities other than God. But the one who is slaughtering the animal, even though in the name of Allah, himself is a polytheist. What about that? Quran says no. So, in other words, uh, the details of the Almighty's Sharia have been mentioned. And after having done that, God says, Al Yawma Akmaltu Lakum Dinakum. This is verse 3. Today I have completed for you your religion. Wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati. And I've perfected for you my blessing. Wa raditu lakum al-Islam adina. And I am now satisfied by giving you Islam as a religion. So that's the declaration of the completion and perfection of religion. In other words, what is mentioned is that uh, whatever the Almighty wanted to give in the name of religion has now been given. There is nothing left. Religion has been completed, and the Almighty's mercy has been perfected. What it means is that this life itself is a blessing. Uh, we didn't get this life because we did something extraordinary to deserve it. It's a blessing. But despite the blessings of this life, there are still problems, some serious, perplexing questions. It's only God who could have answered them. And he did indeed answer them in his book. And when he answered them all, the questions that were needed to be addressed, he answered them and then declared that I have now perfected for you my mercy. In other words, now it's icing on the cake. This is what I've done for you. Then we move on to verse 6, which is talking about another aspect of the perfection of religion and completion of his mercy that is being talked about. We know that the Almighty has required us to say our prayers regularly. We know that a precondition for saying our prayers, formal prayers, is that we be in a state of wudu, ablution. But then we also know that there are circumstances when it's not possible for us to do wudu, or not possible for it to be done easily. It would be very difficult. So the Almighty, apart from mentioning the process of wudu in this verse 6, he also talks about the alternative, that is tayammum, which is available if water is not available, when you are not well, you are taken ill, and doing wudu is not recommended, or you are in a state of journey when doing wudu with water might endanger the scant reservoir of water that you are carrying. So that in itself really is a blessing that the Almighty has given, and He has mentioned it in this surah, which is talking about the completion of religion. Then I move on to verse 8 of this surah, which is talking about much the same thing that has been talked about in verse 135 of the previous surah, An-Nisa. The two surahs are a pair. So don't be surprised that there are two verses which are found in both surahs, almost the same wordings, something that has not been mentioned anywhere else in the Quran. So, when we point out that the Quranic surahs are in pairs, there are reasons for it. It's for the reader to discover and find more and more evidences of a design that the Almighty has presented, but has left it to us to discover it more and more. And I think the idea is that God knows that it's that way that we're going to be more and more interested in reading the Quran, because the Quran is going to give us a sense of satisfaction, a sense of achievement when we read it and discover more and more wonderful aspects of understanding that it has, laid bare, presented before us. The verse here mentions at the beginning almost the same message as it's mentioned in verse 135 of Surah Nisa. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu kunu qawwamina lillahi shuhada bil qist. Believers, be firm in your commitment to justice, to fair play, becoming witnesses of God before the mankind. So persistently stand for the cause of justice. That is what the Almighty desires from us. He wants us to behave and perform in a manner in the society, create a society where it's justice that seems to be the most prominent principle that is being practiced. So Surah Nisa talks about it, Surah Maida talks about it. Not surprisingly, because these are the surahs which are talking about the principles, the outlines of an ideal Islamic society. But the interesting thing is that in Surah An-Nisa, after this basic expectation of doing justice is mentioned, it is followed by the mention of the Almighty that believers should not be deterred from doing justice, even if it goes against their own self-interests, against the interests of their parents or their relatives. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ. So one of the reasons why people are unjust when they are at the helm of the affairs, they are deciding about the disputes of people, etc., is because they have their own self-interests or the interests of their parents or relatives, and they don't do justice. They're biased. Surah Al-Maaida verse 8 is talking about the same expectation, and it follows by saying, following this statement, it says that وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَانُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. Let not the enmity of a nation incline you to be unfair. Be fair. وَأَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. It's the closest to taqwa, God consciousness. So that is the other reason why people are ordinarily unfair. That is, they say that I'm not going to allow him to get justice. I'll see to it. It's this enmity, this ego, this hatred that causes people to be unfair. So that's what this surah is mentioning. And that is a very good example of how the two surahs, An-Nisa and Al-Maaida, are forming a pair. Then we move on to verse 12 and verse 13, wherein the Almighty is talking about a covenant, an undertaking that the children of Israel, the Jews, they had with the Almighty. Don't be surprised that this subject is here in Surah Al-Maaida, because Surah Al-Maaida is actually a covenant. It's talking about an undertaking, a promise that Muslims are making to the Almighty, and the Almighty in turn is making a promise to them. So there was another nation, at least one, that got the same privilege. They did not live up to the expectation of the Almighty, expectation of the promise. And their plight, as a consequence of them turning their backs towards the promise, has been mentioned. So the Almighty mentions this mithaq, covenant. وَلَقَدْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ. And God had already taken a covenant from the children of Israel. And then he talks about that covenant. And then in the next verse, it says, فَبِمَا نَقْضِهِمْ مِيثَاقَهُمْ. So, because of the fact that they broke their covenant, لَعَنَّهُمْ, we cursed them. And what happened as a result of that curse? وَجَعَلْنَا قُلُوبَهُمْ قَاسِيَةً. Their hearts became hard. They were not worthy of, they lost their ability to understand the truth, to feel strongly for the truth. They could not understand the truth because of this hardness of their heart that happened as a consequence of them turning their backs towards the promise they made to the Almighty. Then we move on to verse 18, which is talking about the misunderstanding that religious people have. God is actually addressing both Muslims as well as the people of the book, people who were given books before the Quran. It says, وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى نَحْنُ أَبْنَاءُ اللَّهِ وَأَحِبَّاهُ. And the Jews and the Nazarenes, the Christians, they say, we are the sons of God and his favorites, his beloved. That is, we are the chosen people. God is going to be kind to us. He has chosen us to the exclusion of all others. We are his favorites. This is what the Jews thought and still think. This is what the Christians thought and they still think. And this is what Muslims have always been thinking. It seems to be a common religious disease ailment. How does the Almighty respond to it? Probably, if the Muslim point of view was correct, he should have said that, okay, neither of the two of you, it's these Muslims who are my favorites. But no. Instead, the Almighty said something which really is important for us to look at and see our conditions and find out whether we really are his favorites, or is it just a wishful thinking that we have kept within us because it pleases us. The Quran says, "Qul, ask them." If they're claiming that they are favorites of the Almighty, ask them. فَلَمَا يُعَذِّبُكُمْ بِذُنُوبِكُمْ. Why has he, that is, why has God been punishing them for these sins? That is, Had you been his favorites, you would have all along your history been treated in a way that you would have appeared his favorites, on top of the world, strong, dominating, everybody else serving you. Instead, look at what's happening to you. You are begging to others. You are being, your subordinates, subjugated, weak, both economically, militarily, as well as militarily, and in other fields. So, is that what is the hallmark of a favorite nation of the Almighty? So, that really is a misunderstanding which is there amongst all three faiths belonging to the Abrahamic religions, Abrahamic tradition. Okay, then we move on to uh, verse 20, where again the story of the children of Israel is mentioned, and it's the story that is talking about the time, the era of Moses, Musa alayhi salam. The followers of Musa alayhi salam were expected to go through various different phases of their test of faith. There were times when the Almighty expected them to fight against the enemy. There was a land that was actually selected for them, and they were just asked to enter the territory, and they'll be the ones who will conquer. But because there were people who were living there and they looked physically strong, most of the followers of Musa alayhi salam, they refused. They refused to enter the territory, enter the land. And the end result was that the Almighty mentioned after they refused. They said that we're not going to enter. Go and do it yourself. But as far as we are concerned, we're going to stay here. Go you and your Lord and you fight. We are sitting here. So this was their attitude. When they showed this attitude, the Almighty punished them. He mentions in verse 26 of Surah Al-Maaida, he says, you are going to be abandoned for 40 years. This land that was chosen for you, innaha muharramatun, it has been declared forbidden for you. And now your fate is going to be that you will yatihuna fil ard. You will, for 40 years, you will wander throughout the land, and it's not going to be given to you. Your entire generation is going to be wiped off, and the new generation would emerge, and they are going to get this land. In other words, the Almighty is saying that if there are people who have been chosen by Him to be representatives of His message, and they don't perform properly according to the expectations of the Almighty, then they are punished in this very world. They see the consequences of their misdeeds. Then we move on to the story of the two sons of Adam, Abil and Qabil. The story tells us that they were both asked to offer a sacrifice to the Almighty. And in those days, it used to so happen that the sacrifice that was accepted by the Almighty would appear to have been accepted, and the one that was not accepted was wiped off. you could see that it's being destroyed. It's, rejected. Now, while the sacrifice of Habil got accepted, that of Abil was not accepted. Why? Because uh, because obviously the Almighty accepts only the offerings which are sincere, which are offered in a way that is acceptable, is sincere. So when that happened, Abil, he killed Habil, his brother, and it was the very first murder on the face of this earth. And the story, the way it's narrated here, is also giving a very clear indication that likewise is happening in the case of the children of Israel who are jealous of the children of Ismail, like Qabil was jealous of Habil. And they're not accepting the Almighty's decision. In that case, it was a decision of accepting an offering, a sacrifice, and rejecting another. Here in this case is acceptance of one nation and rejection of another. It is it is a trial. It's not an easy trial. But then there is only one way to face this trial. That is to accept it, to accept the reality. I mean, if God has decided that somebody else is going to be accepted uh, in preference over you, that's how it is. Can you fight God? Can you can you can you fight His decision? So that's what is being presented to the children of Israel through the story that they already knew, and they were informed that it happened to them. It happened to uh, uh, Qabil, and he lost his way. He was cursed by the Almighty. He could not find the right path. Likewise is going to be your case if you are going to follow his footsteps. Then we move on to verse 32, which is telling us, after narrating this story of the two brothers, Min Ajli Zalik, because of that, that is, it was this first murder of a human being, a brother killing a fellow brother, that led to this decision of the Almighty. Katabna ala Bani Israel, we decreed upon the children of Israel, annahu man qatala nafsan bighairi nafsin aw fasadin fil ard, that whoever kills a soul, a human, uh, without any justification that another soul was killed and it was in its retribution, or not because somebody created mischief on earth. These are the two reasons why a person can be killed by a society by going through a proper process of, of enforcement of law, of investigation, and then finally coming up with a proper legal verdict. If these two conditions are not there, and a person is killed for any other reason, it is a crime as huge as if a person has killed the entire mankind. فَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. And if somebody has uh, saved a soul, that is, caused somebody to survive despite the fact that her life was in danger, it is as big a virtue as if he has caused the entire humanity to survive. So, that having been mentioned, The Almighty goes on to say in next verse 33, إنما جزاء الذين يحاربون الله ورسوله ويسعون في الأرض فسادا. Indeed, the penalty of those who wage a war against God and His Messenger. How? وَيَسْعَوْنَ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَسَادًا. And they create mischief, corruption on earth. That is, people, an individual or a group of them, they are behaving in a way that because of their behavior, their attitude, life, wealth, and honor of the ordinary people are at their mercy. They're in danger. For such people, the Almighty says, their punishment is that they be killed mercilessly, or be crucified, or their hands and feet be cut off from opposite sides, or they be exiled, taken to sent to a different land. This, the Almighty says, is their punishment, insult in this life, and there's going to be a big punishment for them in the next life. As I said yesterday, God does not tolerate somebody playing with the lives, the honor, the wealth of other fellow humans. Corruption on earth is intolerable. The reason why there is apparent permission given to perpetrators of crime is that this life is a trial. And therefore, I mean, if there is not a good system in place, people can do what they want to do. But they're not going to be able to get away with it. If they're not going to get punishment in this life, this punishment should get implemented. If the society is a decent, disciplined society, it is functioning on the principles of God's message, such people must get punished. Anybody who does anything wrong in public to cause the lives of others to be in danger, the honor, property has to be taken to task. Otherwise, crime grows. It gets more confident. It gets strengthened, spreads across. We move on to then the next verse, which is verse 38, that talks about another punishment. Don't be surprised, we're talking about the final version of God's Sharia that was implemented. It says, وَالسَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ, a thief, male or a female, فَقْتَوْا أَيْدِيَهُمَا, amputate their hands, جَزَاءً بِمَا كَسَبَا, in return for recompense what they did, نَكَالًا مِنَ اللَّهِ, and as a deterrent punishment from God. In the modern times, people, they are against this punishment. They talk about it negatively. Because, it's very strange that when you have a certain point of view, a narrative, which gets popularity, it's amazing the way human minds get influenced. Really, the art of propaganda. People argue, and as a result, when things are put across forcefully, effectively, impressively, you get influenced. It's amazing that people are, they can tolerate the fact that there are thefts, there are various different forms of corruption. They exist, they are rampant, but that's fine. But if a person loses his left hand, because of committing the crime of theft, which he had no reason of doing, he wasn't poor, he wasn't desperately in need, All these considerations are to be taken into account before deciding that a person is guilty and deserves to be punished. So the Almighty, He says that this is going to deter. And indeed, a few hands amputated, and the result that you achieve is complete absence of theft. That in itself is not a bad bargain. Okay, we move on and we move to verse 43, which is a very interesting verse. It talks about, well, verse 42 is talking about the approach of the Jews who were living in Medina, wherein they would at times come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for getting their disputes decided by him, even though they were Jews and they had not as yet acknowledged the Prophet as God's messenger. And yet they used to come to the Prophet to get their disputes settled. The Quran says, "O Prophet, it's up to you. You want to settle their disputes, decide about their disputes or not. It's up to you. There'll be no blame on you if you don't decide them, because they've not believed in you. However, if you decide, then you must decide on the basis of justice." That's verse 42. Verse 43 says, فَكَيْفَ يُحَكِّمُونَكَ? But how is it that they come to you for judgment? Why? وَإِنَّهُمْ التَّوْرَاتِ, even though they have Torah with them, Torah, فِيهَا حُكْمُ اللَّهِ, in which there is God's judgment. Torah is God's book. There's God's judgment in that book. They believe in Torah to be God's word. They don't believe in you as yet as God's messenger. So leaving Torah and coming to you for judgment, the Quran says, وَمَا أُولَٰئِكَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ. They're not believers. So the Quran is accusing these Jews of not being believers, not because they're not believing in the last prophet, but because they apparently believe, they claim to believe in Torah, and yet they're not deciding their affairs in the light of Torah. That is what disbelief is. That's what I keep saying. You believe in something, you claim that you believe, and then you turn your back. You reject it. You don't take it seriously. So in the subsequent verses 44, 45, and 47, what the Almighty says is that, and this is addressed to both Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Verse 44 says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ. Whoever does not judge, refuses to judge by what God has revealed, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. They indeed are kafirs. See, somebody claims to be a believer, but refuses to judge according to what God has revealed. He's a kafir. The next verse says, such are the people who are zalim, who are unjust. And verse 47 says, such are the people who are fasiq, that is, defiantly disobedient. So the Quran is mentioning this reality to the believers that now the message has come to you. Your task, your job should be to read it, to understand it, and to follow it. Those who are not following it, they're not believers. Then in the next verse, the Almighty is explaining why is it, this is verse 48, why is it that there are these differences? I mean, why could there not have been one religion? The Almighty says towards the later part of the verse 48, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. Had it been God's will, He would have made you all belong to one religion. وَلَكِنْ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ فِي مَا آتَاكُمْ. But He has allowed you to be free to choose whatever religion understanding you feel is acceptable to you. And this He has done so that He tests you in what He has given you. So it's all a trial. So, this trial is of, first and foremost, your honesty in understanding, in taking the right decisions, and then your commitment to the truth. It's simultaneously those two aspects of human personality that are being tested. Are you honestly choosing what you think is right? And when you have chosen something as your understanding of God's message, are you following it properly? And this process would continue. While you are following the understanding that you have chosen for yourself to be from God, that's what your decision is, you should also keep revisiting it. And you will find that either your confidence is growing, or else you probably are feeling that there's something else which is better. So it's really an ongoing process that should go on. And the Quran says that this diversity of faiths, religions, is a trial from the Almighty. Then we move on to another important subject, which is mentioned in verse 51. The Quran says, Surah Maida says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, believers, la tattakhidul yahud wa nasara awliya. Don't take the Jews and the Christians as friends. Ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd. They are in fact friends of one another. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. And whoever is a friend to them among you, then indeed he is going to be counted as one of them. It is because of this and verse and some other verses that many Muslims, many practicing Muslims, they believe that they cannot make non-Muslims their friends. The end result is a behavior which is weird. You're living in a society where a vast majority of people are non-Muslims. They are your neighbors, they could be your colleagues, they could be your partners, your bosses, your subordinates. But deep down, you feel that, these people are not worthy of being made friends. You know what the trouble is? The trouble is that you are expected to deliver God's message to them, but you can't be friendly with them. The trouble is that the Quran says that there is no contradiction in the Quran. And that in itself is a clear proof of the reality that it's from God. And the Quran also allows in this very surah, probably it was surah, verse 4, or was it 5? It allows Muslim men to get married to the chaste women of the people of the book. They can be made your wives, but they can't be your friends. The Quran mentions that the relationship of a husband and a wife is a relationship of mawaddatam wa rahmah, love and sympathy. But they can't be your friends. It may happen that a person converts to Islam, his parents are non-Muslims. So I can go on and on and on. So you might ask me, what are you up to? What are you trying to say? Are you criticizing what's mentioned here? Astaghfirullah, God forbid. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, if that is what the Quran says, even if I don't understand, I have to accept it. But the Quran is not saying it. You see, Al-Yahud and An-Nasara are the Jews, the Christians. Al preceding a noun in Arabic is like the before a noun in English. It could mean one of the two things. Al-Yahud all Jews of the world and all Christians of the world. That could be one meaning. And another meaning could be these Jews, this particular group, and these Christians. How would we decide whether it's the first meaning or the second? Context. The context would clearly decide. So I'm telling you now what the context says. Move on to verse 57 from verse 51. The Quran says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, believers, لا تتخذوا الذين اتخذوا دينكم هزوا ولعبا من الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم والكفار أولياء. Don't take those who have taken your religion, made your religion a subject of ridicule and amusement. Among those who were given the book and other disbelievers, don't make them your friends. And fear God if you're truly believers. You know what they do? When you call people to pray, that is, you make azan, they make fun of it. So now it's pretty much clear that there were some people of the book, Jews, Christians, who used to make fun of God's message and the rituals of Islam. So the Almighty said, don't make them friends. Obviously, we can't make them friends. We will not make any so-called Muslim also our friend who's making fun of our religion. So that hopefully is clear. Then we move on to another important message in this surah, verse 65. It says that if people who have been given God's message, the book, if they are to follow it sincerely as a community, as a society, a vast majority of them, the system is following it properly, then such a nation, such a community is bound to prosper economically from a worldly point of view in this life as well. It's a promise from the Almighty. He says in verse 65, وَلَوْ أَنَّ أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ آمَنُوا وَاتَّقَوْا. Had the people of the book believed and had they been God-fearing. And it goes on to say later, in verse 66, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ أَقَامُوا التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ وَمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْهِمْ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. Had they implemented the rules of Torah, Injil, and what was revealed upon them from their Lord, the akalu min fawqihim wa min tahti arjulihim, they would have consumed provisions from above their heads and from beneath their feet. That is a description suggesting economic prosperity, help from the Almighty. So in other words, if a Muslim society is to function according to Islam properly, the system and a good number of people, particularly those at the helm of the affairs, there is bound to be economic prosperity that they will experience by the help of the Almighty. Then the Almighty mentions the fact that one of the reasons why, an important reason why people go wrong in religion, religious understanding and practices, they get corrupted. They move away from the right path is exaggeration. So the Quran addresses the people of the book and says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ, say, O people of the book, لَا تَغْلُوا فِي دِينِكُمْ غَيْرَ الْحَقِّ. Don't exaggerate, don't exceed limits in matters of your religion unjustifiably. So, the people of the book, they, for instance, said that Jesus Christ was born without a father by the Almighty through his word. So he's the son of God, God forbid. That's exaggeration. Muslims have also done their bit to exaggerate many things that have happened because of exaggeration. When you exaggerate, you are being imbalanced. You're causing harm to the belief, the system that you're a part of. So that really is something that has been criticized. And then the Quran goes on to tell us that not all these people of the book were alike, not all the Nasara Christians were alike. There were some amongst them who, when they heard the Quran, they accepted and believed and they got emotional. It says in verse 83, وَإِذَا سَمِعُوا مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ, and when they hear what has been revealed to the messenger, تَرَى أَعْيُنَهُمْ تَفِيضُ مِنَ الدَّمْعِ, you see their eyes overflowing with tears, مِمَّا عَرَفُوا مِنَ الْحَقِّ, because of what they have recognized of the truth. So, when you see the truth that you were anticipating, you were looking forward to, you know, witnessing, experiencing, when you see that truth, uh, you do get emotional. So these good Christians, Nasara, mm, they they had this response, and the Almighty is praising them. Now, interestingly, this surah, like Surah Nisa, ends somewhere in the middle, after two-thirds of the surah. Verse 86 here, its subjects that were to be discussed, they have completed. I mentioned yesterday that the same thing happened in Surah Nisa. Uh, we reached 126, verse 126, and all topics were completed. But then there were some questions that came up in the mind of the readers that were taken for discussion. There were four questions at the end of Surah Nisa, from verse 127 to verse 176. Here, from verse 87 onwards, till verse 120, there are five questions that have been addressed. That in itself is another remarkable feature that makes these two surahs pair. Something, this style of presentation, that is uh, the basic subject matter of the surah, after having been presented, is followed by what we might call a question answer session. It's nowhere else in any other surah. So this is again another feature that causes them to be partners in a pair. So the questions that arose were, number one, you see, uh, what should we do if, as the Quran has mentioned, that there are only what the Almighty has prohibited, things which need to be considered prohibited, and nothing else. The Sharia is complete. What if somebody has prohibited something else on him, on himself, herself? You know, has made a statement, a commitment, a vow that certain other things are also prohibited. How to break it? Is there any way that the oaths, the promises can be broken? Verse 89 mentions it, that yes, if you have made certain oaths, promises, um, and made it in the name of God, but they are not worth continuing with, because they were not correct to have been done in the first place. It wasn't a good idea. Then the compensation, expiation of doing so is mentioned. Feeding 10 poor people with the food that you ordinarily uh, provide your family with, etc. That's the law that has been mentioned. The other question that arose uh, was regarding this you know, provision, the mention of what is prohibited and what is not. So when these four items were mentioned as having been prohibited, there were people who had this question in their minds. They would ask as well that if these are the four items only, then what about alcohol, and what about gambling? Uh, and the Quran answered in case of both that they too were prohibited. You know, they were already prohibited in human nature, but people, if they were confused, their prohibition has now been made clear. And there was a gradual process which was followed in implementing this prohibition. So the Quran says that إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. Satan only wants to cause between you enmity, animosity, and hatred through intoxicants and gambling, and to take you away from remembering God and from the prayer. So, are you not going to stop? Are you not going to desist? Now, this question, some people mention to show that alcohol is not prohibited. They say that where is the word haram used? It's only a suggestion of the Almighty that I'm not going to stop. Well, it's a very strong mention by the Almighty. Are you still not going to stop? Okay, let's move on to the third one. Um, there is this mention now in verse 95, wherein the Almighty says that, as mentioned earlier, that when you are in a state of ihram, uh, you can't uh, you can't kill animals, you can't game, uh, you can't kill game. It's not allowed unless it's the the food or the fish in the rivers or oceans or seas. So if somebody does it, somebody kills an animal while in a state of haram, what should be done? There is a process mentioned to determine what kind of penalty is going to be imposed. In another clarification, verse 103, uh, Quran clarifies that, you know, there are certain things that were declared as sacred to the people who were going for Hajj, like the animal that was meant to ultimately be sacrificed. But there were people who had uh, made certain other animals sacred as well. In the Arabian society, it was a religious innovation. The Almighty declared that they are not a part of God's Sharia, that they be considered as sacred and therefore be respected. And finally, there is this mention in verse 106 that, you know, when people are being witnesses at the time when somebody is giving a will, what kind of process should be followed? Because, you have to be sometimes a part of a process where somebody is giving his will for the wealth he's leaving behind in favor of some of his relatives. So if there are people around and they are a witness, what should be their attitude? And this also brought the subject of the witnessing of the prophets that's going to happen on the day of judgment uh, against people whom they had delivered the message. And the Almighty says that this is going to happen come what may, and gives the example of Jesus Christ, Isa alayhi salam, that he too is going to be called upon to be a witness against his followers. And he will say clearly that he delivered to them only what God had asked him to deliver. And if people changed later, he was unaware of it. However, he would plead to the Almighty uh, to forgive them, not directly, but indirectly. And the Almighty, towards the end of the surah, mentions that on the day of judgment, his decisions are going to be based on pure merit. He said, "Haza yawmu yanfa'u sadiqina sidquhum." This is the day when the truthful will benefit from their truthfulness. May the Almighty enable us to understand His book properly, to know and value its wisdom, and to be able to follow it to the best of our abilities. If there are any questions, I'm available to respond to them. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. If not, then inshallah, we'll meet tomorrow again with the next surah, Surah Al-An'am. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.